Fantastic. Open Cavies. Any other questions before we get started? Lovely. Right, so as you'll notice, the title of today's slides is The Search for Spices. And I mentioned a few different people by name. And one of the things I wanted to go over to you guys right quick is how to read Roman numerals. Because I just always kind of assumed by the time you guys make the sophomore year you knew how to read them. But apparently that is a gross over-exaggeration on my part. So I've gone ahead and put 1 through 10 over here on the board. It's quite easy, actually. The only weird part is you have to understand that 5 is 3, X is 10, and then slashes represent an addition or predisposition for that. So, for instance, you have 1, 2, 3, and then 4 is actually a little weird. Sometimes you can write it like this, sometimes you can write it like this. 4 slashes is really an older way of doing it. This is kind of post-Victorian. So, I don't know if you guys ever noticed, like, if you go look at, like, clocks, like clock towers, things like that, a lot of them have that instead. That is correct still. But usually in the modern times, you'll see it written like this, because, again, that's kind of how we decided to do it. So, and 4, and then I and V, so 1 to 4, 5 is 4, and you have 5, 1 after 5, 6, 2 after 5, 7, 3 after 5, 8, 1 before 10, and then 10. That's how it goes down. So if I write like Louis the 14th, it would be X, I, V. Get it? Solid? Maybe half cup? 2 liters? Something, I don't know. Cool. All right, so spices, what am I talking about? What type of spices? Are you using oregano? Hey, don't laugh. Oregano goes, like, that goes good with everything. Maybe freaking ice cream, throw oregano on it. Bam! Yeah, I tell a lot of dumb jokes, but apparently that was a good one. That's going in the memory banks. Make jokes about oregano. That's hilarious. What am I talking about? Give me a spice. Cinnamon! Yeah, what else? Pepper! Thank you, Gord. Thanks for hitting my back. Yeah, those are all things that are spices. What do they all have in common? They are all what?
Spicy.
Well, yeah. Well, yes. Being that they're spices, that is correct. But they're all luxury items. If you think about it, spices are not just things that you flavor food with. You use them in all kinds of other pursuits. I mean, you guys are already, well, not really you guys, that's not fair. Freshmen. They're spraying that, they gotta get that Axe body spray all over the place. I don't know if you guys do that anymore. That was something that always cracked me up. It's like, come over with Axe. And it's like, Power Man scent or whatever they call them. Just spray myself down with that. But yeah, all kinds of perfumes, essential oils, any kind of thing for flavoring, and even in some cases for preserving, is used in all manner of luxury items. Take, for instance, soap. Do you guys know how you make soap? Yeah, basically. There's a couple different ways you can do it, but it's essentially fat. You scrub it all over your body. Disgusting. It's like thing made of animal fat. That sounds delicious. Gross. Yeah.
So like soap is in now
No, because there's all those chemicals in it. In fact, it really depends on what you're making the soap out of. It's essentially rendered fat of various types, And it's scented with various scents. And usually we're going for things that have that pungent odor. And if you think about it, we spend a great deal of our time, even today, trying not to stink. And you hear people talk about things like, people back in the day, they never bathed. Well, yeah, it's true to the extent that we consider bathing. I mean, honestly, if you use that same set of rules, we don't bathe either. Because a significant number of people in the country use showers instead. That's not bathing. If you think about the most efficient way of staying clean, think about it this way. Your power goes out. How do you shower? How do you stay clean? Well, if you're lucky, you've got like a gas water heater. Yeah, maybe you'll have hot water. Honestly, I don't. I've got an electric one, so I don't know how that works. But when we go out, we have no hot water until the water comes back on, or the power comes back on. Excuse me. And in the case of where it's out for like a week, you got to find other ways to stay clean. And one time that way meant getting out on the gas grill, lighting that bad boy up, and literally boiling water on a grill so you can make a bath with that. Yeah. Well, that's kind of hard to do for most people because to fill up an entire bathtub with hot water takes a lot of energy and a lot of water. Yeah. So the most efficient way is you heat up a small amount of water and do like what we call a sponge bath. And you wipe it down and use your soap or things like that, and you de-stank yourself and get the important bits, and that's that. That's bathing, essentially. So it's not that people were like rank back then, although certainly they weren't nearly as fastidious as we are today. Because the average American takes at least one shower a day. At least. Think about that for a second. And like in Kentucky, with air conditioning, it's not really as necessary. Like you can imagine Kentucky without air conditioning, it becomes a lot more pungent, So it's not that people were dirty necessarily, but they spent a great deal of time smelling pretty, just like we do today. I mean, there's a lot of unpleasant stenches that could occur, for much of history, but it's not like that's absolutely insane either. So think about what types of scents we use in soaps and things like that. Some of them are readily available, some are exotic though, spices and things like that. So they're luxury items, and using them is something that's pretty much reserved for the really rich. The average person is going to use whatever they can, they can get away with it. But to show off, to have the really nice stuff, the really exotic scents that make people go, hey, you're going to import that stuff, and it's going to be expensive. In fact, pepper is so rare, it's worth more than gold. Spices like sugar were kept in special chests that had a lock and key that were held only by the master and or mistress of the house. Because I'm not talking if you can afford sugar and things like that, you're not like Tom or Joe Schmo who's working the fields. You are wealthy, established individual, So you have a home, you have all these types of things. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to afford it in the first place. And they would use it in all kinds of different ways. Now that being said, it doesn't mean that people would go their entire lives without having it, especially in terms of foods. It was actually pretty common for masters and mistresses during Christmas to give their servants a gift. And usually it was something like this. The master of the house would give the servants a keg of beer, or fruit punch is actually more popular. And the mistress of the house would give out a pie of some fashion. Now, what exactly was in that pie varies from place to place. Sometimes they were meat pies, sometimes they were sweetmeats, sometimes there were other types of things. But basically, that's kind of how it goes. It needs to be flavored with exotic spices. That's kind of how that goes. It's one of the reasons that Christmas was really kind of a big deal. In fact, one thing I find interesting about Christmas, you guys know the song, The 12 Days of Christmas? You guys know there are 12 days of it. Christmas Day is the first day. Traditionally, you're supposed to celebrate all 12 days. So, for instance, there's gift giving and things like that, and continuously. So, I mean, we're talking huge parties and things like that. In fact, the tradition in the Regency era is for the 12th night of Christmas, when everything's put to an end, is when everybody goes and pulls down the green boughs and things that have been used to celebrate or decorate their homes, and it's burned in a giant bonfire. So basically it's like, are we supposed to take down your Christmas tree and your Christmas lights, things like that? The 12th night of Christmas. That's when it's supposed to happen. Of course, there's some people, they leave the Christmas lights on year round.
Yeah.
Whatever, it's fine. Hey, it's Super Bowl lights. Whatever. But anyways, so here's the thing is, so they're luxury items, they're expensive, yes. So if you sell them, you're going to be making tons of cash, right? Well, the problem is, most of the people who control all of that, who control the trade routes, are either Turks, Arabs, or the Italians. So if you could find a way around that, to sell and cut out the middleman, you don't have to pay all these tariffs as they're crossing across Asia. You don't have to pay all these middlemen that jack up the price each time they sell it along. So you can undercut everybody else selling these spices and still make a killing. I'm talking, it is so lucrative that if you're a merchant speculator or you're one of these heads of a merchant house and you send out 3 ships and one is sunk in a tsunami and another is raided and burned by pirates and only one makes it back out of 3, that one will cover the cost of everything else and make you money. That's how expensive it is. So it's one of these things that it was so lucrative that people were dying to find a way to get to the spice markets that was around the pre-established Silk Road ways. Thing is, though, it's kind of a daunting task. You know, you guys have probably heard of Christopher Columbus, yeah? We're going to talk about him. But he's not the first guy to find a way to the Asian spice markets. In fact, he never found a way. He was just a guy looking. The original idea was actually set up by the Portuguese, and their idea was to go around Africa. The problem is Africa is a huge place. It is, with the exception of Asia, the Eurasian continent, the biggest continent in the world. You know, it's like 3 Americas or 2.5 Americas in my fit. So going around it is a very, very daunting task, especially considering that European ships weren't really designed to go across oceans. Now, with the exception of Viking longships, they're pretty much only ones capable of doing it, and even they had a rough time of it. I mean, the oceans are big, vast things with crushing waves, really temperamental weather, all sorts of dangers. Not to mention, food preservation's kind of a big deal. So we're going to address all of these issues as we look at what happened during the Renaissance, which made the age of exploration possible. Starting off with technology. The first thing we have to know, if we're going to go anywhere, is where are we going? Now, traditionally, how are we going to know where we're going? We don't have GPS. How am I going to use it? How am I going to figure out where I am?
Was it a star?
Yeah, we use the stars, sure. But have you guys ever studied that? You know how you use the stars to navigate? Because it's not just like, oh, there's the North Star. We go that way. There's more to it than that, yeah. Sorry? Oh, did I? No, that's okay. Did I? Roots? Oh, there's traditional roots? Yeah, that's correct, I think.
It's not, right?
No worries, yeah, for sure. Root, yeah. Yeah. We don't, that's okay. Where? Yeah, direct route, yeah, there you go. Right. That's supposed to be an E. Doesn't matter, it's fine. And if you remember, what did I say, guys, whenever I said, I don't count spelling? Somebody at some point is going to say, like, you spelled that wrong. I know, I do that. But so do you. It's okay. The world is not made on broken spelling errors. Anyway. Yeah, where was I? I forgot. Oh yeah, so navigating with the stars. You guys know how you do that? Well, basically trigonometry and algebra. It's actually a fairly simple calculation. You guys know Pythagorean theorem? A squared plus b squared equals c squared? Yeah, you basically use that. However, you have to have a way of telling your location. There's actually a few things that go into navigating a ship. But the most basic way is you use a backstaff. and using mathematics, you can figure out where you are. But the backstep method is a little tricky. For one thing, it involves basically looking into the sun, which is never a good idea. And so they started using a new device that actually is not new at all. The device was invented by the Greeks, perfected by the Arabs, and then brought back into Europe because of the Crusades. That device is the astrolabe. The astrolabe is a device that looks a bit like a disc. In fact, with an arm on it. And that arm is lined up with a star, and then using basically a series of calculations, you can place yourself latitudinally. This, along with map making, is what allows us to go places, because we can see where we are and where we're going. Now, that being said, they were still pretty inaccurate. It took a lot of time to figure out where things were, and maps had to be made by hand, so it was a painstaking process, but eventually they were able to map out the world. And that's what allowed exploration. In addition, the type of vessel we take is incredibly important. One of the most important concepts you have to get with sailing is that it's not the wind blowing the ship. That's not how sails work. Consider this. Take your pen, right? Fix it in your hands. So you have it so you're holding it right like this. All right? Now pretend this other finger is the wind. Push the top of this forward. What happens? Yeah, it's pushing down, isn't it? It's literally, you have a lever, and you're applying pressure, and it's forcing your fingers downwards, yeah? So it's not like, you're pushing and you pushes your arm, That's not how it works. To put it another way, the wind is pushing the sails downwards. Take your finger, put it on the desk and push down. What happens to your finger? It slides forward, yeah? You keep pushing down, it's going to move. Unless you have really solid grip and you break your finger in half, which you become too grip. But it's going to slide forward, yeah? That is because the desk is providing an upward pressure as well. So the ship, or your finger, takes the path of least resistance, forward. That's how sails work. Now, keeping this in mind, the wind is coming from one direction for most of the time. It can change, but it's more or less coming from one way. So if you're going with the wind, it's directly behind you, easy peasy. You set your sails and on you go. But if you are turning, or you want to go against the wind, you're in trouble. Unless you understand some of the principles about sailing. First of all, you guys know the expression set sail? We're going to set sail. You guys know what that means? Have you ever thought about what those two words together, set sail, means?
Set up the sail.
Yeah, not set up the sail, because those are two different things. There's raise sail, which is where you literally open them up, but setting it is bracing it. Because if you think about it, you basically have a pole and a pole with some candles dangling from the mast, right? Okay, so if you just let it blow loose in the winds, it's just going to kind of do like this. It's going to be flat. It's not actually moving the ship. So you have to brace it against the ship itself for it to actually catch the wind and push you along. So you want to move those sails, angle them to catch the most wind possible, and then brace them down. Sort of like if you ever flown a kite, and you're flying it one way, and then the wind changes direction. You have to move direction around to keep flying. You know what I'm talking about? It's the same sort of thing. And this happens, by the way, every time the wind changes. So you've got to move these giant sails and set the sails, or brace the sails, every single time you want to change direction as well. Because if you are sailing this way and the wind is going this way, you have the sails set one direction. But if you want to change direction this way, you've got to adjust the sails to catch the wind. It's even worse if you have the wind coming this way and you want to go against the wind, because you can't obviously go directly against it, otherwise you'll blow backwards. You have to do what's called tacking. where you go at a 45-degree angle, more or less, like so, like so, like so. And there's all manner of different terms for how the wind is coming in, whether it's a wide reach, a broad reach, a narrow reach, if you're abaft or a beam or any types of other things. In fact, if you listen to pirate talk, it's almost exclusively sailor jargon. Like there's all kinds of funny named things on a ship. A friend of mine actually did sail a ship for, I think it was like 6 months, the Lady Washington. And actually it was in the new Pirates of the Caribbean as part of a high school program. And when he was on this ship, he learned all this stuff. He's a sailor. He is a sailor. There's no question about it. And so, you'll find all these kind of funny names, like, okay, what does this do on the ship? Like, one of the ones where I was like, what in God's name is a cat stopper? That is a thing on a ship. Cat stopper. I was asking him, like, what does a cat stopper do? He goes, it stops the cat. Jerk and jerk. No kidding. What's the cat? Because I know it's not like, what is he talking about? The cat apparently is part of an anchor. The cat stopper stops the cat from going too far. Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, there are all kinds of crazy names for things, and you eventually learn them if you sail, but it's a weird thing if you're just listening and you don't know what's being said. That's one of the reasons, actually, there's a joke, it's a sailor's joke, kind of, in Pirates of the Caribbean. When Johnny Depp comes down in the first movie, he says, nobody panic, we're taking over the ship, and Will Turner jumps over the edge and says, I, avast, and everyone starts laughing. That's because I means yes. Avast means look. Yes, look. Okay. That and also the ridiculousness of two guys like, we're taking the ship. But it's that combination of words that's very silly. Anywho, so the construction of ship was important. Now, to better tack, to better have use of the wind, you actually need a combination of different types of sails called a sail plan. Traditionally, European ships use a square sail. This is like kind of more or less the shape of a Viking longship. The Arabs use a triangular sail called a lateen sail. A new ship plan was designed by the Portuguese called a caravel, which combined square sails and lateen sails that allowed you to catch the wind in more circumstances and thus have better power. So this allowed for the explorers to go out beyond the coasts and actually go explore. So this combination of things allowed for exploration. However, another major problem awaits a sailor. Because sailing today, we have the advantage of all kinds of technology. Food sources can be lightweight, tasty, nutritious, and easily storable. Historically speaking, there's only a few ways that we can actually store food. One of them is pickling. Another is salting and smoking. Another way is alcohol. And so if you look at the types of food sailors had to subsist on, it's not exactly the tastiest thing in the world. Pickled vegetables and meats, salt pork, ship's biscuits, delicious. Also, rum and beer and wine had to be consumed on a regular basis because water goes bad really quickly. If it's raining, you're fine. But imagine stuffing water into a barrel for a month. There's no refrigeration. It's going to be scummy and gross, and you really don't have any choice but to drink it. So how do you make it actually palatable? You put some booze in it. Grog is actually a type of alcoholic drink that is a mix of usually rum, but it's really any hard spirit, and water. So that's why they would do it. But even with those techniques, there's no way that a ship could put enough food and water on to keep its crew alive to sail long enough and far enough around Africa. So Prince Henry, Prince of Portugal, who's known as Henry the Navigator, proposed the idea of setting up forts in Africa. Yes, ma'am.
So basically, like all the, I don't know, like pirates is a good word to use.
Sure. Why not?
So basically, they were all drunk all the time.
No. Because the thing is you get used to it the more you drink it, and by no means do they, I mean, pirates were frequently drunk, but that's a whole other ballgame. We'll talk about pirates. And sailors that were well known for loving their whiskey and their alcoholic spirits and things like that, but they weren't drinking enough to become intoxicated. When you water things down, plus the fact that these guys were very tolerant of it. I'm trying to remember my measurements here. There's a journal I read one time by a guy named John Tipton, who was famous in Indiana history. He ended up fighting this one particularly brutal battle where everyone who was like his friends died. And his journal talks about what he did during this campaign. And every single journal entry ends with something like, had a, I think it's a quart of whiskey, or something like that. I forget the measurement. But it had like this, had like this, had like this. And it's like a pretty substantial amount. And then after that particular battle, it's like basically a gallon. And it's like, oh my God, you know. And it's like when you think about it, it's like that's him like drinking it to deal with like a shock. So that's like what someone would do when they're like trying to calm down. His usual was like a quart, something like that. So it's just like that's a lot of alcohol, and that's there's tolerance to it, you know. Yeah.
Is that why pirates have like food?
No, that's largely due because of the same thing we're talking about here. Fresh fruit and vegetables is impossible to carry on ship because they'll rot. So you don't have a lot of that. So a lot of sailors and a lot of folks like that would lose teeth because they weren't getting proper nutrition. Of course, that wasn't accounted for most people in society, to be honest. But yeah, that's generally why they portrayed that way, because of the disease of scurvy. Scurvy was a major problem for sailors because they lacked vitamin C. And one of the symptoms of scurvy is losing teeth, as well as bleeding out of gums and things like that. In fact, scurvy sea dog is a common pirate colloquialism, refers to this guy has scurvy, and the sea dog is just another term for somebody who's a sailor. Although there's a little bit more to it than that. But yeah, the pirates are a fine example of sailors because a lot of them were sailors. All were sailors technically, but a lot of them were sailors from countries merchant marine that got sick of the brutal conditions that the merchant marine had. Because basically, if you were an employer, there was no laws against abusing your workers. It was thought that if you don't like the situation, you just quit. The thing is, it wasn't illegal, for instance, to say your boss would come beat you because you weren't working hard enough, or things like that. So the situation was kind of dire, and if people got sick of it, they would just leave. And especially when you see happens in the Caribbean, you've got a situation where pirates were legalized and used as a way of economic warfare, or used in economic warfare against their various rivals, these European powers' rivals. And then eventually, as the European powers make peace, suddenly their way of life is no longer legal. So they just continue doing what they're doing, and what have you. But we'll talk pirates a little bit later. We'll go into quite a bit of detail about it. But a lot of stuff we could experience of what sailors were dealing with in that time, it's kind of the same stuff, really. So back to the point, Bartolome Diaz is able to make it to the Cape of Good Hope because of the forts that were being built under Henry the Navigator in his expeditions. See, what a fort was basically like a gas station. It was a fortress. It was set up on the African frontier, and these folks would often trade with the Africans to bring in food and water and supplies that they would use to restock the ships, and they would trade either for gold or for certain goods that were desirable. In fact, these same forts are going to be instrumental in transatlantic slave trade later on. But that's not what their initial purpose is. Their initial purpose is to resupply ships as they make it around Africa. So Bartholomew Dias is the first guy to make it around the tip of Africa, around the Cape of Good Hope. And eventually, the guy who makes it all the way is Vasco da Gama. Now, he reaches India after 10 months. That's one way. So you're looking 20 months to make it there and back again at the very quickest. Usually it was a couple years, maybe even 3 or 4 or 7 before you would make it back, depending on what the trade routes were being utilized. So that entire time, you're sailing on this ship, you're not getting paid. You get paid as a sailor in food and in drink and in a place to sleep, and then at the end of the voyage, once all the goods are sold, you get a percent. Now here's the thing, is as much money as was on the graphs right here, it could be a lot. To put this into perspective, imagine walking home out of a ship one day and bringing with you 7 years' salary. How much money that would be? Yeah. And so back to the point about drunken sailors. Well, some of them were family people and took this money and they subsisted on it. A lot of them, however, were young men out to seek adventure. Think about it. Most people this time, they don't move beyond 1 mile of the place they're born. So getting to see the world is a huge draw. Even with all the hardships, even with all the difficulties, that plus the promise of 10 at the end of the voyage meant that you could have a living. And so these sailors would go do this, they come back, and what are young guys going to do with a bunch of money? They party a lot. As in, they would blow 3 years' wages in a few weeks, living like kings. And then, when they were destitute, when they had no more money, guess what they do? Go back on the ship, and on you go. And rinse, recycle, repeat. There's many songs from this time period about sailors going out, wasting all of their money, and then going to sail again. And this kind of crazy experience. There's also stories of these guys having wives and sweethearts. In particular, there'd be ladies who would, oh yeah, sweetie, I'm coming in, buy me this nice dress, things like that. As soon as they're out of money, I'd see you. Maybe it's somebody else. So it's just kind of an interesting lifestyle, if nothing else. But, this is what they were doing, And this establishment of a new trade route means Portugal emerges as the European power, basically. They're the number one guys. They have money, they're powerful, they're prestigious. So other countries want other ways of kind of getting in on that. Christopher Columbus is going to exploit one of those. See, Christopher, you guys know where he's from? No, he's not. A lot of people think that. He's actually Italian. The thing is, when he went around to the various kings of Italy and said, hey, I've got this idea, I want to sail west, and I want to go to China, they're like, no. But it's not probably for the reason you think. How many guys have heard that everybody back then thought the earth was flat? That is a commonly held belief in the United States, and it's not true at all. Most people knew that the earth was round. The problem is this. Okay, you're going to sail west. You don't know how big the ocean is. Remember what we were just saying limits how far you can go? How are you going to resupply? You're going out in the middle of nowhere. The European maps at the time had that as one giant ocean. Even if it's possible to sail that way, it's too big. You're not going to be able to make it in time to get out of food and supplies, and you will die at sea. That's why people were shooting him down. That, and in fact, look who he asked. He asked Italy. Well, guess what? Italy already has a trade route. It's through the Silk Road. He goes to Portugal. They have a trade route. It's around Africa. He goes to Spain. They don't have a trade route. They're the ones who give him the money to do it. Because even if he fails, it's an attempt. It's not that much money. But if he succeeds, well, the potential gain far outweighs the risk. So he sails, and he fails. He doesn't actually reach anywhere near India, but he believes he has. Hence why we call Native Americans Indians. The first group he meets up with are the Taino. And basically, he's not really that interested in them. However, he does eventually find that they have gold. He does, however, in his voyage, also bring back plants and animals that has never been before seen in Europe before. One of these, of incredible importance, arguably the most important crop ever discovered in human history, potatoes. Potatoes. Potatoes are delicious. You can't make French fries without potatoes. If anyone says sweet potatoes, that's a filthy lie. Those are not French fries. Those are something else. In all seriousness, though, potatoes are a wonderful crop. Consider this. They grow where?
In the ground.
Yep. Which means they are more resistant to other types of diseases than any other crop. They also grow at more climates than they're originally from the Andes. And yet, there's no climate you can't grow potatoes. They're also stupidly persistent crops. My grandfather one time had potato peelings that he buried, and they grew potatoes. That's like, yes, he did do that. I mean, they weren't the best potatoes in the world, but it's like, good Lord. You know, the other thing is nutritionally, you guys know balanced nutrition, right? That's how you have to have different types of things, minerals, vitamins, things like that. And otherwise, it's not a complete meal. Are you guys aware that mashed potatoes with butter is a complete meal? Like, technically, you're getting all your nutrients from that. It's not a good idea, but you can do it. But that's important because through subsistence agriculture, we're surviving on what we can grow. We want crops that we can rely upon. We want something that's versatile and that frankly tastes good. Because consider this, if we have a garden and then we're growing veggies and one type of vegetable doesn't come up, it's like, oh well, I'll go buy it at the store. Guess what? If you only survive on food you grow yourself, there is no going to the store. You eat whatever you've grown. If you have to eat green beans for every single meal for 3 months, you do it because that's what you have to eat. So something like a potato, boil and mash it, put in a stew, you can do all kinds of things with them. Pretty nice. You know, pretty nice. The population here quadruples because of the potato. People are able to fight off diseases because they have more complete nutrition than they have before. They're healthier. They live longer. They have better lives because of the humble potato. Now, there's more goods that are exchanged as well. And in fact, if we look at the exchange of people, places, and ideas, not places, people, ideas, and things, that's collectively known as the Columbian Exchange because of Columbus. Now, I think it's interesting about Columbus in our own history today is if you have paid any attention to social media, every so often Columbus Day, something goes around that Columbus was a slave owner. Columbus was a slaver. You know, he started the slave trade. And to some extent, yeah, that's true. He did do that. In fact, if you look at people who suggested the enslavement of people, it was Columbus. But he wasn't suggesting African Americans, he was suggesting Native Americans, the first group enslaved in the New World. So, here's the thing about that whole thing. I think it's very interesting how we as human beings think about history, because we become very emotional about it. And that might seem weird to be saying you shouldn't be emotional about history, but think about it. We are basically scientists. As historians, we want to find out what happened. And when we start becoming emotional about it, we start changing how we view history. We want to tell a story about heroes and villains and this sort of mythological thing that really has no place in it because these are people. It's unfair to them and to our interpretations to try to look back in the past from our own contemporary morality because they didn't hold the same things true. For them, ownership of another person was totally legal. Now, unethical treatment of people is still unethical, and in fact, Columbus almost ended up in prison because of his unethical treatment of people. But that's a whole other thing. That's not usually brought up. And furthermore, Columbus was a product of his age as much as we are products of our own. Think about what we allow to happen in our world today. Starvation, homelessness, war, and enslavement. Even though it is illegal, it happens in this country. People are enslaved every single day. We haven't stopped it. So who are we to look back at them and judge them because of what they did? That's just something to think about. Morality, I'm not even saying it doesn't have its place here, because certainly we can look back at horrible and evil acts committed by human beings against other human beings, but I don't think it's really fair to condemn other people for what they did another time that we can't really fathom, not from a first person sort of way. But instead what we can do is say, that's how it happened. This is what is happening. How can we stop the evils of today? And how do they stop it then? That's frequently we can learn something about it. But I digress. Just consider that as you look at some of the more horrific treatments of human beings by human beings. Because we're going to go there. It's going to get a little uncomfortable sometimes. But consider it from the standpoint of progress. And things are better. Another thing I find interesting about this, by the way, is we have a habit of looking at things today and making them much worse than they really are. For instance, if I were to ask you how safe you feel in your neighborhood today, it's probably going to be less safe than people would have said they feel in their neighborhood 50 years ago. And yet, do you know the crime rate has been dropping significantly every year in the United States? Crime today is at an all-time low. Do you know why that's true? There's a number of reasons. I mean, why it is that we say that it's worse and it really isn't. Think about your access to news, your access to information. You can see things everywhere all the time. It gets reported. Domestic abuse was not reported in the 1500s because it didn't matter. Not in a political, not in a police scale. They were worried about defending the city from barbarians. They were worried about riots and things like that. They weren't worried about Mr. and Mrs. Much are having a shouting match. Now we do. Now it's reported. Now it's stopped. It's not to say that world's perfect by means, but it's getting better. That's an encouraging thought, if nothing else. Progress. So Christopher Columbus ends up setting in motion this whole exchange. And what happens is some pretty extreme things. Now, Spain lays claim to all the new land that Columbus discovers. And there's gold there. And that really rubs the Portuguese the wrong way, because they're like, crap, someone's found a thing, they're going to cut into our profits. So they say, nope, all this land is ours. Now, before you go, they don't have any claim to it, not the Spanish, but they claimed it anyway. And so they begin rattling their sabers and preparing for a war, which is going to engulf all of Europe, because Spain isn't just Spain. Spain is also the Holy Roman Empire. Portugal's got its allies as well. So we're talking about a global scale. So the great mediator steps in to try to stop this from happening. That's the Pope. Pope Alexander VI says, all right, we're going to draw a line. Basically, it's the same thing your parents did. You had a sibling, you're like, I don't want the last biscuit. No, I don't want the last biscuit. We're cutting it in half. You get a piece, you get it. His slice is bigger, but fine. You move the line. The first line in our case is the line of demarcation. The second is signed the Treaty of Tordesillas, but it stops the war. So that everything east of the line is given to Portugal. Everything west of the line, which is the greater claim, is given to Spain. That's what they founded. And they agree. That's why today, what language do they speak in Brazil? And the rest of South America? Yeah. Spanish. Well, I speak Mexican, Spanish in Mexico, but I speak other Spanish. I actually speak French in some areas too, and English, but we'll get to that later. This is an astrolabe, by the way. Yes. Please. So other attempts were made to find Western Passage. Vasco Nunez de Balboa led an overland group and actually was the first to see the Pacific Ocean. Although Magellan is credited with the one actually naming it. In fact, the Pacific Ocean is named because of the word peace. It's peaceful. It's much calmer than the Atlantic. But even so, these are two very interesting voyages. Specifically, Magellan's voyage. He was the first guy to gain credit for circumnavigating the globe, although he himself didn't actually do it. Magellan's crew did, but only a few of them actually made it. It was a very perilous journey, but it made a ton of cash and proved that what Columbus sought to do was possible. But you have to go around South America to do it. So exploration started going into ways that, not that we wouldn't expect, that's not what I'm trying to say. It's a way of looking at the world in a new way. New discovery, that sort of thing. And to be frank, the circumnavigation of the globe sort of sets a limit on how vast it really is. I mean, consider this. Finding out that it's not infinite, finding out how big it is. I mean, we knew the Earth wasn't infinite to begin with, but having a number that, hey, this is how long it took us to sail, starts to put a limit on it. Starts to shrink the world a little bit. And that's what technology is going to continue to do. You want to go see what it's like to be in Australia right now? Go look it up on Wikipedia. You'll find out in an instant. You want to talk to somebody from another country? Easy. You can do it using the internet. The speed of communication has changed dramatically how we have relationships. I know 3 different individuals that started dating someone who lived in California. 2 of them are married. And that's from here, by the way. I know people who have dated from all the way around the world using technology and having these intimate relationships, but far away. The world is shrinking. Sorry. We'll see again tomorrow. Turn in your what? I'll remind me tomorrow. I'll get it. This is